You've seen Europe in movies, on postcards, and in travel vlogs. Clean streets, punctual trains, historic monuments, elegant people strolling between museums and cafes. A continent where everything seems to work. Where, in many people's minds, the future arrived long ago. But what if I told you that this Europe isn't so perfect after all? Hidden among the glass skyscrapers, Gothic cathedrals, and Instagram-worthy vineyards, there is another Europe, one that almost no one shows. A Europe where families sleep in makeshift shacks just a few miles from the Eiffel Tower, where entire neighborhoods live without sanitation in the heart of Spain, where children go hungry in Portugal and immigrants are persecuted on the streets of Dublin, Marseille, and so many other cities. A Europe where mafias control neighborhoods, where some communities look like war zones, and where even the threat of a new military conflict has returned to haunt the borders. Today on Bello Mundo, we travel across this old continent without a filter. From the glamour of the shop windows to the brutality that lies outside, it's time to get to know the dark side of Europe. Number 1. Poverty. When we talk about poverty, almost no one thinks of Europe. But it's there, growing, silently, uncomfortably, and well hidden from tourist itineraries. To give you an idea, today there are more than 95 million people living at risk of poverty or social exclusion in the European Union. That's practically 1 in 5 Europeans. And what's most shocking? Children suffer the most. More than 20 million are in this situation. This means that 1 in 4 faces difficulties in eating, housing, or even going to school properly. In Spain, the situation is even worse. 27% of children live below the poverty line. Families survive on less than €1,000 a month, where rent alone accounts for more than half. In working-class neighborhoods of Madrid and Seville, schools are already reporting an increase in the number of students who depend on free meals to ensure at least 1 decent meal a day. 20% of the population cannot afford to pay for electricity, gas, or food. And in 2024 alone, more than 400,000 Portuguese people needed help from food banks. And here's the kicker. Most of these people have jobs. In Italy, more than 5 million people live in extreme poverty. In France, 10 million survive on less than €1,120, money that, in Paris, doesn't even pay for a tiny studio apartment. In Dublin, schools have started distributing hygiene kits to students. Some parents can't even afford toothpaste. This is the Europe that almost no one sees. The Europe of peeling walls, unaffordable rent, and empty plates. The poverty that doesn't appear on postcards but is there, knocking on the door of 1 in 5 Europeans. Number 2. Hidden slums in Europe. The classic image of Europe is charming little houses, clean streets, and squares full of cafes. But no one talks about the muddy streets, the alleys without sewers, and the shacks covered with tarpaulins. Yes, Europe also has its slums, and there are many of them. Want an example? Cañada Real Galiana. It is located a few minutes from Madrid, Spain. It is 14 kilometers of shacks where more than 7,000 people have lived without water, garbage collection, or electricity since 2020. The majority? Spanish gypsies, immigrants from Morocco and Romania. The government cut off the power, claiming risk, but those who live there know. It was to force these families to leave. And this is not an isolated case. In Portugal, on the outskirts of Lisbon, there is Cova da Moura, known as the Invisible Slum. More than 6,000 people, most of them of Cape Verdean origin, have lived there for decades. Almost all of Cape Verdean origin, they live there in cramped houses, stacked on top of each other. An urbanization project exists on paper, but in practice it has turned into evictions and pushing people into even more distant neighborhoods. In France, the scenario is no different. A few miles from the center of Paris, regions such as Seine-Saint-Denis are home to dozens of immigrant camps, shacks made of wood, plastic, and metal. In Italy, history repeats itself. In the Puglia region, more than 100,000 migrants work in the fields and live in shanty towns with no electricity, no water, nothing. They are invisible to those who only see the country through photos of Venice or Rome. This is the real Europe. The Europe that exists, the Europe that no one shows, the Europe that bears scars hidden far away from the postcards. But believe me, it gets worse. Number 3. Homeless. If the slums expose the lack of infrastructure in Europe, the situation of the homeless exposes an even crueler abyss. Right in the middle of the sidewalks, squares, and shop windows that the whole world admires. Paris, a postcard of the world, now has more than 3,000 people living on the streets every night. And that number doubles in winter. Under bridges, in stations, in front of crowded cafes, families huddle under cardboard and donated blankets. And in preparation for the 2024 Olympics, the government's solution was to expel them. Police cars, fences, forced removals. Solve? Not even close. In Lisbon, the situation is just as serious. Between 2019 and 2024, rent rose by more than 60%. Those who can't pay end up on a friend's couch, in their car, or straight onto the streets. In the capital alone, there are already more than 1,300 people living like this. And it's not just immigrants. There are Portuguese people who have lost everything after being laid off, divorced, or falling ill. In Ireland, the shock is even greater. The country has reached the milestone of 15,000 people in shelters, almost 5,000 children. Children growing up in government-paid hotel rooms with no space, no home, no future. And you know what's most outrageous? There's no shortage of housing. There are more than 11 million empty properties in the European Union, but most of them are in the hands of investment funds, waiting for prices to rise. Meanwhile, the lives of those who have fallen through the cracks are falling apart. Having a home in Europe has become a privilege, and those who don't have one, they become statistics, or they become invisible until someone trips over their cardboard box. Number 4. Racism and discrimination. If the housing crisis has already exposed the cracks, racism and discrimination show that not everyone lives in the same Europe. Just change the color of your skin, your accent, or your religion, and the promise of equality begins to crumble. In France, the conflict between the state and communities of Arab and African origin has become part of the landscape. The case of Nahel Merzouk, a 17-year-old Frenchman of North African descent, who was killed by a police officer in 2023, sparked days of riots, fires, looting, and a country divided between us and them. And it's not just Paris. The country continues to pile up secular laws that, in practice, seem designed for the Muslim population. Veils banned, abayas banned, restrictions that cloak prejudice in neutrality. In Germany, since the arrival of refugees in 2015, Islamophobia has skyrocketed. Attacks on mosques, street assaults, threats. And along with it, far-right parties are growing, winning seats in parliament and shaping discourse. The same is true in Austria, Denmark, Portugal, and Ireland. Slogans such as "Portugal belongs to the Portuguese" or "No more Muslims" are no longer isolated statements, but are echoed in campaigns and debates. 7 out of 10 Muslims in the European Union report having experienced discrimination. 7 out of 10. the black delivery man who gets beaten up on the street, the young Moroccan stopped by the police just because of the color of his skin, the Pakistani who gets beaten up in Dublin. This is not the exception, it is routine. And when the state closes its doors, when the market rejects and schools marginalize, a social time bomb grows. Number 5. Territorial security. For a long time, the idea of war in Europe seemed like a thing of the past. It remained in books, in the ruins of World War II, in Cold War movies. But that sense of security quickly turned into an illusion. Everything changed in February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine. Europe woke up to a nightmare that seemed buried. Troops crossing borders, cities bombed, millions of refugees fleeing. The entire continent rearmed as it had not done since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Germany, which had adopted a pacifist stance since World War II, threw that rule out the window. In 2024, it announced the largest military investment in its recent history, more than $88 billion. France increased its defense budget. The United Kingdom sent more troops to the east, and Finland, a newcomer to NATO, has become practically a military base on Russia's doorstep. Poland reinforced its troops on the border with Belarus. Lithuania erected walls. Estonia began distributing civil defense manuals. It is no exaggeration. Tension has become routine. In 2024, NATO conducted its largest military exercise since the Cold War. 90,000 soldiers, tanks, fighter jets, air defense, cyber attack training. The message was clear. And don't think this is just for Eastern Europe. Under NATO's Article 5, if one country is attacked, all others must respond, including France, Spain, Italy, and Portugal. The nuclear risk is back on the table. Fear has returned to barroom conversations, and that idea of a Europe protected by diplomacy today seems more fragile than ever. But armed conflict is not the only war happening on the continent. Number 6. Organized crime. While the headlines say Europe is preparing for a military war, in everyday life it is already fighting an invisible war. A war without tanks or soldiers, but one that moves billions, kills silently, and often goes hand in hand with political power. The war on organized crime. Contrary to what many people think, the mafia is not a thing of Italy's past, nor is it just the stuff of movies like The Godfather. It is alive, it is modern, and it is more international than ever. Today, European organized crime is ruled by the 'Ndrangheta, a mafia that originated in Calabria, in southern Italy. Unlike the Cosa Nostra in Sicily, which became famous for its films and more ostentatious style, full of shootouts and revenge, the 'Ndrangheta prefers to work in silence. No spotlight, no crime scenes in the streets. It is a much more discreet, much more efficient mafia, and much richer. They are not only in Italy, they are in Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Spain. And today they dominate cocaine trafficking in Europe. To give you an idea, it is estimated that more than 80% of the cocaine circulating on the continent passes, directly or indirectly, through them. And how does it get there? Through the port of Antwerp, Belgium, which has become the new cocaine hub in Europe. In 2023, Spanish police uncovered a scheme that hid drugs in banana shipments from South America. Who was behind it? The Calabrian mafia. But Italy is not alone in this underworld. If you've seen the movie Taken, you know what we're talking about. The Balkan mafias, especially those in Albania and Serbia, have gained strength in recent years. They are experts in maritime routes and criminal logistics. They make deals with Latin cartels and ensure the safe arrival of shipments. And crime goes beyond trafficking. They control extortion, human trafficking, construction, and even soccer clubs. And the scariest part? The European mafia no longer lives in the underworld. They wear suits, sit on corporate boards, and often shake hands with those who should be fighting them. Number 7. Disinformation, radicalism, and the erosion of democracy. To conclude this tour of Europe's dark side, we need to talk about a problem that does not appear on maps and has no borders, but is corroding everything from within: the social divide. Because when you combine crisis, hunger, inequality, and the feeling that no one can solve anything, what emerges is space for something much more dangerous: extremism disguised as a solution. And that is exactly what has been spreading across Europe in recent years, fueled by social media, coordinated disinformation campaigns, and a general sense of abandonment. Let's start with France. In 2024, the far-right party Rassemblement National, led by Marine Le Pen, emerged in polls as the country's main political force, surpassing traditional parties. And why does this matter? Because the basis of its discourse is clear. It blames immigrants for economic problems, associates public safety with race, and uses fake news to reinforce fears and prejudices. In Germany, the rise of the Alternative for Germany party, known by its acronym AfD, is already worrying even security authorities. In some regions of the east of the country, the AfD has even led local elections, advocating openly anti-immigration policies, questioning the values of the European Union, and flirting with nationalist rhetoric dangerously similar to that of a past that Germany would prefer to forget. Portugal has joined the same wave. The Chega party, which started as a noisy minority, is now in parliament and growing by always saying the same thing: blaming immigrants, spreading lies, promising to bring order to everything. And where does this type of discourse spread fastest? On social media. Europe has already mapped hundreds of automated accounts, closed groups, and fake profiles that spread misinformation about vaccines, immigration, elections, and the economy. In 2023, the European Commission even imposed sanctions on digital platforms that failed to combat the spread of manipulated content, especially during political campaigns. On Telegram, for example, conspiracy theories circulate about the Islamization of Europe, alleged secret plans for population replacement, and even rumors that authorities are financing the arrival of African migrants to unbalance European culture. All false, but viral. The problem is that in the meantime, trust in institutions is sinking. Today, less than half of Europeans believe that governments really work for the people, and there are countries where more than 30% already think that maybe a leadership that rules without being accountable isn't such a bad idea after all. And that is where the danger lies. Because when hunger strikes, the rent is no longer affordable, jobs are not coming, and the government does not respond. Those who shout the loudest win. And what comes next? History has already shown us how it ends. This is the Europe that no one shows in tourist brochures, the Europe that doesn't fit in travel videos or magazine editorials. But it exists, and it's growing every day. The goal here is not to attack the continent, but to show that no place in the world is immune to collapse when the foundations deteriorate. That inequality, prejudice, manipulation, and neglect have no borders. What about you? Did you already know this other side of Europe? Which of these realities surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments. Share this video with anyone who thinks the old continent is all glamour. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you on the next trip through our Bello Mundo. See you there.